In this lesson, we'll lay down a texture base for our character's shoes. All right, fantastic. So this is kind of where we left off in the last lesson. We had kind of wrapped up the pants for the most part here. Now, we will be revisiting the pants when we do sort of a dirt pass over the entire character. But at this point, let's go ahead and right-click and go to Visibility, and we'll just go ahead and Show All here. And we've really got one article of clothing left to texture for him, or at least get started with texture, and that's his shoes. Now, if I go ahead and grab my selection tool here, I am in face mode using Smart Selection. We'll just come in and draw a kind of a rectangular marquee here around the shoes. And you can see over in the UV view, the shoes consist of 2 shells apiece. So let's come over here and we'll just go ahead and switch back to our brush for the primer for the moment. And let's right click and let's just hide the unselected information here. So we're just looking at the shoes. Now I'll go ahead and work on one shoe in this lesson. Since there's 2, the second one will be handled in exactly the same fashion. And the first thing I'd like to do is come over to our clothing layer here, or rather a clothing group. Let's create a new group. I'll just go ahead and double click on that, and we're going to call this one Shoes. And we'll go ahead and start with a new layer for paint. We'll call it Base. I'll go ahead and drag that into my Shoes group. There we go, fantastic. So with that in place, we're ready to go ahead and begin laying down our base texture. But just like with the pants, we're going to go ahead and start with a photographic base. So let's go ahead and jump over to our image manager, and again we can either load in an image by browsing to our project files with this button, or we can just simply drag it in from another window here. So I'll just go ahead and drag in an image. Now this image should be in your project files. It's simply titled Leather Texture. So with this image, again, we want to go ahead and start to texture kind of the leather areas of the shoe here. Now obviously there's a sole here, so that's not going to receive the leather texture. And there's some details here. But let's go ahead and just drag this to our canvas, which will automatically switch us over to the Paint Through tool. And I'm holding down Control and Shift just to shrink that image down some here. So now this particular image, let's look at it really quickly here. There's a lot of variation in the texture in this image. So you can see here that there was a light that was causing some glare on this leather surface. So kind of the area that I want to target for texture is right around here. Something that is not nearly as illuminated by the light source. And so you can see a lot of that nice grainy texture, and we get kind of this reddish brown color that isn't very washed out. So again, with this, let me go and Shift plus sign so I can increase the opacity of that image preview here. And you can see here that part of the image is kind of right around in here. So I'll Shift minus sign a few times so I can see what's going on behind. We'll go ahead and kind of get that into position here. And we'll just go ahead and start to paint in some of this texture. Now with this texture, again, I'm just using the default brush here inside of Mari. So if we come to our brush manager or brush editor here, you can see I've got the alpha component turned on. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off so we're not able to shield any of this texture based on the pressure of my tablet. We want all of it to drop down. So I'll go ahead and bake that here. Now this is kind of where it gets tricky because the texture isn't going to match up completely here. So that's why I'm using the default brush, because it's kind of got that soft edge to it. So I can come over and I can kind of work to blend in the texture if it's looking a little too dark in areas, just by holding the Shift key down and sort of translating that image into a different position here. So let me just kind of orbit around. You can see there's a little bit of a drop off there, so we might want to come over to a little bit different area. Let's go ahead and turn off the radius control here. That'll allow us to kind of softly paint that in. All right, great. So we're just going to kind of orbit around here, and we can always turn off the lighting for the time being just to make sure that we're getting total coverage here. And that'll allow us to pick out any major variation in the texture. So you can see there's a pretty major one right there. I might come in here and try and soften that up, turn my alpha component back on, and that'll allow me to blend the two areas together a little bit easier. So I'm going to turn the lighting back on because that's going to allow me to view the details in the normal map. And I'm going to go ahead and just continue to kind of lay down this first pass of this texture here. Now I'm not too concerned that I'm painting onto the sole a little bit. We're going to actually cover that up. And this other shoe is starting to get in my way, so let me just go ahead and hold the S key down, make sure I just have one shoe selected. I'll right click and hide the unselected again. Fantastic. So you can see here as I get to the edge of the image I'm painting, it's basically creating a line, so we want to be mindful of that. Just like so. And just dropping down additional texture here. Now, if you're having problems getting the full resolution of the image, or you feel like the resolution that you're projecting onto the surface is not what your patch resolution will support, you might come over into your painting palette and check the resolution of your buffer size. So now mine is set at 2K. So we'll come over here. Now I'm also painting relatively closely. Now that's allowing me to get kind of the maximum amount of resolution I can out of this image. If I were to zoom out and paint from a distance, paint maybe bigger areas that are further away, then I might not be able to get as much detail out of this image, just because of the buffer sort of filtering that resolution. All right, fantastic. Looking good here. Now again, I'm not too concerned at this point with any kind of projection masking, just because I know that I'm zoomed in at the close enough to where it's not that I'm super concerned about this texture rolling around a curved edge or something like that. So now at this point, I've kind of got all the areas pretty much covered that I want this leather texture in, with the exception of one, right here on the top of the tongue. So I'll come in here and just paint that texture in. Just painting and baking as I need to. Making sure I hit all the edges that we need. Looks like I got there we go. Had a corner there that wasn't receiving any texture. So we'll just kind of orbit around and eyeball it really quickly to make sure that we've got enough coverage where we need it. Looks like I missed a spot, maybe right in here. But I think that's going to work. So at this point we can go ahead and turn off the lighting, and now we can come in and start to sort of patch some of these areas by turning on the alpha component. So if I want to come in here, and you can see I missed a spot right in there, sort of start to smooth that out just with some lighter pin pressure. We come in here and sort of smooth that out as well. Just like so. Now again, I'm not too concerned with the individual grains in the leather texture. The camera should not be close enough to pick up on that individual grain, but basically that grain is going to be read as noise. So I'm going to come in here and paint over this area again. Looks like maybe we didn't get complete coverage there. Now with this image, you'll notice when you're in some of those areas that are more washed out, because it'll look a lot more desaturated in color. So we'll come in here and just sort of touch this one last area up. All right, great. So that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and move on. So at this point, we've got this base leather texture over the entire shoe. I'm going to go ahead and create a new paint layer on top of that, switch over to my paint tool, and at this point we can come in and begin to texture some details. Let me come in and maybe grab just a basic brush by holding down the K key, and let's take a look at some of these details that we might want to texture. So right in here, maybe we hold down the J key and pick sort of a warm yellow color, something like that for maybe some of these here. So we'll just kind of zoom in and paint this area here. Now this is again using some of the details in the normal map to kind of pull out some additional color detail in the shoe. So, but again, I'm doing this on its own layer. So maybe this is sort of a kind of a polished leather detail that's kind of attached to the more rough base leather for this shoe or this boot. All right, so I think that I see kind of a trim around the ankle here that we could come in and paint this color as well. Let's go ahead and bake that down. Make sure I turn off my alpha component here so I can get complete coverage. Not worried about pin pressure here. I may actually darken that up just a little bit. Looking there, it feels a little bit light. So I may darken that up a little bit, but another thing we could come in and do outside of details like that is we can come in and begin to texture the sole. So hold J on my keyboard, again, to bring up the color pop-up. I'm going to come in and pick sort of a deep brown color here, and start to kind of layer that into the area where there's a sole here. So now again, this sole is going to be composed of kind of a rubber material, so we'll have to consider that as well when we're working on our specular map. But I'm going to come in and just sort of basically just paint in kind of this flat brown color for the sole. I want to mind the area where the sole connects to the leather here, so I really want to define that pretty well. Just kind of orbit around and kind of make sure everything's lining up just the way it should. And again, I'm doing this with the model fully lit so I can take advantage of the details in the normal map. So we'll come in just like so. And I'm going to go ahead and bring that up a little more. So once we kind of go around the perimeter here of the sole, we can actually flip the shoe upside down and begin to work on the underside as well. Now, more than likely, this underside is not going to be seen, but we definitely don't want to leave it that flat gray color. So it'd be a good idea to come in here and begin to sort of paint the underside as well. So these are some of the details I'm going to go ahead and finish out in between lessons. I'll go ahead and finish out kind of some of this yellowish color here, as well as the sole, the flat color for the sole. Go ahead and do the same thing in between lessons. And when we come back in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and continue focusing on these shoes. We're going to add some additional detail to them.